Alright guys, so we're doing first impressions regarding to the Galaxy, because I haven't finished it, which is quite upsetting, because if I would have not made this video and played it today and tomorrow, I would have finished it tomorrow, but then it would have been no upload for today, so I'm making a first impressions at literally the halfway point, and then I finish the game Friday, make the video, full review Saturday. And so, I'm exactly halfway through the game. There's 16 chapters, I just beat the 8th one. Right, now, obviously the time breakdown is different. There might be 20 minutes in this chapter and 3 hours in this chapter, but I'm pretty much at the halfway point, right? So I feel like I have a good say to talk about my first impressions, if anything, not more than that, right? So first impressions, I think it's important to talk about what your basic understanding needs to be to play this game. I mean, I'm not going to go into a full breakdown like graphics and gameplay and story and the bugs and all that stuff. I'll cover like the main stuff, but I'm not going to go into a full breakdown. We'll save that for the review, because I did that with the Far Cry video and then I had nothing to talk about in the full review. So, the first thing I want to talk about is kind of what understanding you need, right? So, here's my problem. And it's not really a problem, right? This is the most small inconvenience in the game ever, but I'm bringing it up anyways. And yes, the music has to be that loud, because if there is a millisecond of in-game music, this video will get claimed. And it'll probably get claimed anyways, but whatever. So, you have to have either not extensive, but pretty decent MCU lore understanding, or be a Guardians of the Galaxy fan, right? To understand a lot of the references that are there. But then I was thinking about it, why the hell else would you play this game, right? People who aren't either MCU fans or Avengers comic book fans aren't playing the Avengers game, right? So I think we're good there, but I just wanted to put that out there, because like I said, I'm halfway through. There's probably 4 or 5 MCU references so far, and at least 2 comic references that I've noticed, and I know absolutely nothing about the comic, so I'm sure there are a lot more. So let me break it down, right, how I went into this game thinking about it, because I think that is very important. And so, spoiler-wise, I want to start with that. I'm not going to talk about spoilers, but the gameplay will be in settings and showing abilities that have spoilers in them, right? So if you don't like the skills you unlock or the locations spoiled, that's going to be spoiled here. I'm going to try not to show any cutscenes other than the opening one, but I went into this with, I'm going to say, quite low expectations, like 4 out of 10, maybe 5 out of 10 range is what I was expecting. Right, and you'll see me mess with the settings a lot because it's the beginning of the game, so sorry if that annoys you. But I went in with relatively low standards, right? It's the same company, the same publisher that made the Avengers game. On paper, I absolutely hate the Avengers game, but for some reason, I just enjoy playing it, right? And so, to sum it up, right, to give you a very quick summarization of what I'm probably going to say in a 15-minute video and a 30-minute review. The people who made the Avengers game somehow made this, and they're so different that it makes no sense to me, right? And I can't tell you why, really, without getting into the story, and I'm only halfway, but we'll get there, alright? So my biggest concern going in was the combat. It looked so generic, and I have to skip this part because the music is, I'm going to get claimed. So, there's good music. I think that was obvious going in. There's a lot of music, a lot of licensed songs. They have a streamer mode. I didn't play in it because I feel like that's going to drastically influence the game and all that stuff. But, the music's good. I can't play any of it, but it's what you expect. Alright, so, the combat. All of the trailers showed the most generic, boring-ass combat, right? It looked like the Avengers game combat. Well, it's made by the same people, so that makes sense. And I feel like I always talk about the damn Avengers game on this channel. I've talked about it at least 3 or 4 times. The Avengers game combat on paper is boring, right? There's a light attack, a heavy attack, and like some special moves. Like, it's your most generic ass like hero combat. It's not even like Spider-Man level where there's gadgets and finishers and like the Venom meter and Miles Morales. It's not like that. It's very generic, right? And it's pretty much the same thing here, but with just a little bit tweaking, but it's still fun, and I don't understand how. So, when they originally said you were only playing as Star-Lord, as Peter Quill, I thought that was the stupidest thing ever. There's two ways to do this. Make it a multiplayer game, like Avengers, and have each character be somebody different, blah, blah, blah. Make it a single-player game, and just have it be like those old, like Ninja Turtle games. You can switch between the characters at any time, and they'll have their unique abilities, and you need to use different ones for different situations. And that's kind of what they do, but you only play as one. And so, I thought Star-Lord was a terrible choice, because he is by far the most boring one combat-wise, right? Groot's big, and he can transform and do all this interesting stuff. Gamora has a sword, and Rocket is basically Star-Lord, but he's small, so that at least makes it interesting. Star-Lord, you're Iron Man, basically. You fly, and you can shoot, and you got some melee, which I didn't really use until a decent ways into the game. But it works well, because the way you're meant to play, at least I think, or at least the way I play, is each of the Guardians, they start out with one ability. I have 4 unlockable abilities, including Peter Quill, right? And so, by letting you play Star-Lord, someone who can fly and shoot, you really don't have to pay attention to what you're doing as Star-Lord at all, right? You're really paying attention to the enemy types that are there, and your meter in the bottom right corner, right? You're waiting for a character's ability or assist to recharge with the cooldown and go over, and then you're using it, and then you're just pointing and shooting. You're not really paying attention to what you're doing as Star-Lord. You're mainly focusing on the ability cooldown and all of that stuff, because they throw a decent amount of enemies at you. Not anything insanely difficult, because I am playing on normal difficulty, but on those higher difficulties I can see how this would be a problem. Now, let's talk about those abilities, right? There's 4 of them for each character. Like I said, you start out with 1 for each. And so there's 16 chapters through the game. And relatively that works out to about 1 per chapter for the most part. You have a couple free ones here and there, right? And so that would make sense. And this is going to get us to our next problem, which is the pacing, right? So the abilities, 1 per chapter, you get most of them except for Peter Quill's. You know, if you give his abilities to the player some other way, it solves that problem, right? So the problem is that the game does that exactly. It gives you 1 ability per chapter for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Then you get chapter 8, right? And in chapter 8, they just say, you know what? The game's halfway over. Give them some XP. And they just give you an absurd amount of XP in chapter 8. Chapter 8 is like a 45-minute fight. Alright? And so they just fly you through levels, giving you all these abilities left and right, and just completely throw off the pacing. Now, is that a terrible thing? No, because I want to talk about the pacing as it relates to the story. So, what's the story, right? What are you doing in this game? And so that's right now my primary concern with the game. Reviewing it and giving a score, that's the main problem. Is that for chapters, like I just said, 1 through 7, nothing is happening, right? They're introducing you to characters, showing you gameplay mechanics, putting you in unique, MCU places. Really nothing happens. I mean, you can say it starts in chapter 7 if you want to be generous, right? But nothing happens. You're just meeting characters, going around, and yeah, most games you need an intro to set up the characters and introduce players. I'm not talking like this is an hour or 2. This is a good, 6 to 8 hours of the game. Is maybe even more, depending on the speed at which you play, is just set up and introducing characters so that you're prepared for when the game starts. And so, as opposed to something, let's just take Far Cry because we just reviewed it, where they introduce you to the bad guy immediately, right? Here, that's not the case. The first 7 chapters, you're pretty much just doing fetch quests, and you need more money, and I'll go into that more in the full review, but that's essentially what you're doing for the first majority of the game. The first quarter of the game is just fetch money quest, right? And so from there, they actually start the game. They don't introduce the villain, really, until Chapter 8. So it does have a pacing problem as far as getting things going, right? You go, and they don't really introduce the bad guy and set up the main plot and tell you, okay, here's what's going to be happening, you know, beginning, middle, end, until halfway through. So, again, just glancing over things quickly because it's first impressions. The combat is pretty much exactly what you expect, right? You go around, for the most part, and follow a very specific formula, right? What's my vocab word? Your central gameplay loop, right? What the fuck are you doing? All right. So, what you do, and again, I'm in Chapter 9 now, until Chapter 8. This is how every single chapter pretty much plays out. Introduction cutscene, walking, with some introducing of enemy types while walking. Midway cutscene introducing conflict, ending cutscene, and then introduction cutscene plays into the next chapter. That is how 1 through 7 play out. And then 8, they change that. It's pretty much introduction cutscene and then just fucking conflict for 45 minutes. Alright, and I'm assuming that's the way it's gonna go for the next few chapters. Alright, but it's very, I don't want to say boring in the beginning, but it's boring in the beginning. Right? It's just, you know, like you see here, cutscene, and then you walk around and like introduce like a new heavy or a guy with a shield before they throw a bunch of them at you. And it's not like Fallen Order, where there's a good amount of enemies between locations. You'll have 3 to 4 fights. In Guardians, you're pretty much getting 1 to 2, you know, pieces of combat before you get to the location you're going to. It's a lot of just walking. I know that's setting things up, but it is what it is, right? We talked about the combat, pretty much what you do in the game. Not going into story. I talked about pacing. Game, it looks good. Right? I'm going to talk about quality and performance and 4K versus 60 and 120 and all that good stuff. We'll talk about that in the full review. I'm not going to go into that here. Right? The game looks good. But what I do need to talk about are bugs. So, in terms of bugs, I mean, it's not Cyberpunk. Nothing's going to be Cyberpunk. But it's kind of buggy. Right? So I've had this bug, like I said, in my halfway point 3 times, where it kind of does an introduction cutscene where it shows new enemy type that you're facing, and then it pans out, lets you take control of the character, and then you just can't move. And you have to die or restart a last checkpoint if there's no enemies in order to get the new cutscene and get things going, be able to move again. That's one. Not so significant, it's annoying here and there. Another one, there's a hold on, let me preface that first. Playing on performance mode, there's a relative amount of pop-in anywhere with grass. And you're in space most of the game, so that's not a problem. But when they show a couple wide shots of like the house and all the Earth stuff, there's some pop-in. And you're like, oh, it's not a big deal, it doesn't happen that often. If I noticed it, it's a big enough deal. And so the other bug I guess I had is that there's dialogue options in this game. So like a Telltale game, people talk and you can interact and you have options you can pick from, and you get a little notification top of your screen, Rocket like that you defended Homer, Gamora like that you trusted her, stuff like that. Alright, now how much this actually impacts the game I'll get into in the full review, because I don't know that much yet, but there are choices. They can't be that meaningful, because like the Telltale game, they're not just going to throw away this entire scripted event because you chose something different. Alright, so I'll get into that more once I know more about that. But the bug is that sometimes, at least for me, the left dialogue option, and it's always the left one, you just can't see it. It's not there. If you click to try to read it, that picks it. So I've just been picking randomly for a while now, not knowing what I'm picking or what the other option is. It's happened to me, multiple playthroughs, so I don't know if it's like my load is corrupted and I have to restart the entire game type thing, or once I hard restart, if it'll actually fix the problem. So I want to talk about, I already talked about progression, the skills and all that stuff, but there's outfits here, and this isn't a way to judge something, and this shouldn't be how things work, but they don't cost money like the Avengers game. They're not $20, so that's a positive. It's a single player game, so it'd be a big problem if they were, but you unlock them just finding them throughout the map, and this is a personal thing. The only reason I don't like that is because I just want the stupid movie skins, and I have a feeling that I'm gonna miss them all, and it's really gonna piss me off. Alright, I just want the movie skins. That's all I want. Alright, the skins that they give you, like, they're fine. Alright, I have Groot's movie skin that looks really good. It shrinks him down, it thins him out, which helps me a lot. Like, don't get me wrong, there's some cool ones, but I definitely feel like I've missed some scene that I'm halfway through and only have like 3 for each character. A couple of final things. There's a ultimate, if that's what you want to call it, where you do like a group huddle and like get a boost in morale or whatever, and I'll talk about that more in the review. I'm not sure how I feel about it yet. I'm kind of 50-50 on it right now. Spoilers on the outfits, by the way. The other thing, and this is probably, I think, other than the pacing, right now my biggest complaint, if you can't stand the Guardians in the movie, right, them going back and forth, constantly making jokes and fighting, you're not going to be able to stand this game. There is no silence. They are always talking, right? And for the first chapter, like the first good hour, this annoyed me. I got over it eventually, but they talk a lot just in combat, right? The jokes, there are a lot of jokes, and there's people that laugh at everything, so I'm sure there's gonna be people that think this game is hilarious. It's fine, I would say, like 1 in 5, 1 in 10, depending on just how often they're coming. They slow down as you get further into the game, but they're fine. Everything Drax says pretty much lands because he doesn't say stuff often. Gamora's fine. Groot, I mean, so, but Rocket just talks a lot, and nothing he says is funny, but that's just me. Some people think he's hilarious, so that's more of a personal thing, but it is my first impressions video. So, final thing, and this is just, again, a personal thing, and I had the same problem I have with the Avengers game. They have the license to MCU stuff and to Disney stuff, right? And they make it very apparent in this game. This isn't a big spoiler. Like, there's a Chewbacca like keychain in this game. Like, they have access. There's some other Disney reference that I don't remember. Like I said, they reference the MCU consistently, but they don't use MCU lore for very important things I won't spoil. They don't, use the characters, don't use the likeness, which the likeness I can understand, because that would be a hefty sum to get them in here. But what I do want to talk about is, do these versions of the character, which for the most part is more comic-like, do they sell just visually the default outfits and the way they act, right? And so Rocket sells well, right? I don't think Rocket's really hard to sell. Like, he's a raccoon that's likes guns. Like, it's pretty relatively simple to get across. Same thing with Gamora. Gamora, I would say, is the one that looks visually, obviously, other than Star-Lord, the most different. She looks more like a person than like an alien in this one. But there's other characters I don't want to spoil visually. But Peter Quill is actually the one I believe the least. right? Groot, I mean, you know he's Groot, like, he talks, he says, "I am Groot" over and over again. You can't really get that wrong. Drax is probably the hardest one to do here, I would say, but to get him right and to have a good balance between, you know, being the warrior over the top destroyer and being funny and stupid and all that, but they get it right. Like, Drax is really good, he's the best part, but Star-Lord, I just don't buy him. Right, like, he probably says the least jokes, and that's partly on my choice. He, I don't know, like, he's the weakest character of them all, in my opinion. Oh, and then one more final thing, because this cutscene or this gameplay just reminded me of it. The jumping in this game is so weird. Instead of giving you, like, a free double jump like how most games would, what the game tries to do, I mean, it does well for doing it, it's just not necessary, is whatever the jump length or height, vertical or horizontally, is, that determines the length or height of your double jump. So if it's 10 feet, you'll boost 10 feet up in the air. If it's 2 feet, you'll boost 2 feet. If it's 5 feet across, you get what I'm saying? It's not a consistent double jump, so when you're using it in combat and all of that stuff, it's relatively hard to gauge what you're trying to do, and it just feels really weird whenever you're jumping around. Just the animation of it, how it just drastically changes. But again, just nitpicking at this point. First impressions, I don't want to give a number yet, but it's better than I expected. I'll leave it at that. Like always, this video is at least 10 minutes too long. So that means the full review will be probably twice this length, but that'll be out hopefully by Saturday. I should beat it by then. Get that out there. We'll talk heavily about story and the pacing more in that, but let me know what you guys think of the game so far. No spoilers if this video for some reason does well. No spoilers past, well, no spoilers until Monday. Monday we can do spoilers, because it gives everybody about a week to beat the game, and then a 16 chapter 15-hour game that you should have that beat in a week. So no spoilers if this video does well and everyone wants to hate on me in the comments and be like, well, minute 2 when this character arrives. So, but hope you guys enjoyed this first impressions video. Like I said, it's obnoxiously long, and I'll see you guys on the next one.